The church is supposed to be the bride of Christ and the hope for mankind, but has it become nothing more than a business? Welcome to the Roy's Report, a podcast dedicated to reporting the truth and restoring the church. I'm Julie Royce, and joining me today is Nathan Apffel, a filmmaker who's working on a docuseries called The Religion Business. And in the process, he's confronting megachurches and mega pastors, demanding to know their salaries and their housing allowances. And he's not taking no for an answer. Last month, he got arrested when he showed up at Ed Young's megachurch in Grapevine, Texas, carrying signs asking for transparency about Young's finances. Prior to that, he had a run-in with the security team of televangelist Kenneth Copeland. Why do megachurches have security teams that protect them from honest questions? And why do so few congregations know what their pastors make? And why do filmmakers get arrested when they demand transparency? Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild interview with someone who may be a bit cowboy when it comes to his tactics, but he's revealing some really alarming practices within the church, and he says he's out to change those. We'll get to my interview with Nathan Apffel in just a minute, but first, I'd like to thank the sponsors of this podcast, the Restore Conference, and Marquardt of Barrington. If you're someone who's experienced church hurt or abuse, there are few places you can go to pursue healing. Similarly, if you're an advocate, counselor, or pastor, there are few conferences designed to equip you to minister to people traumatized in the church. But the Restore Conference, this February 7th and 8th in Phoenix, Arizona, is designed to do just that. Joining us will be leading abuse survivor advocates like Mary DeMuth and Dr. David Pooler, an expert in adult clergy sexual abuse. Also joining us will be Scott McKnight, author of A Church Called Tove, Diane Langberg, a psychologist and trauma expert, yours truly, and more. For more information, just go to restore2025.com. That's restore2025.com. Also, if you're looking for a quality new or used car, I highly recommend my friends at Marquardt of Barrington. Marquardt is a Buick GMC dealership where you can expect honesty, integrity, and transparency. That's because the owners there, Dan and Kurt Marquardt, are men of integrity. To check them out, just go to buyacar123.com. Well, again, joining me is Nathan Apffel, a filmmaker with 15 years of experience who's getting in all sorts of trouble making a docuseries on the religion business. So, Nathan, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you join me.
Yeah, Julie, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, and when I say a world of trouble, I'm just wondering, have you been called a scandal monger or a son of Satan yet?
I've been called the literal Antichrist. So,
the literal. Oh, yeah, well, yeah. You know, that probably trumps that. The Antichrist.
Yeah, I got the Antichrist a couple times already. So
you're going to get the T-shirts, the religion business hashtag, the Antichrist on the back.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we're gonna have a couple good T-shirts made for sure.
Well, I had the privilege of interviewing with you, and I'm trying to figure out how long ago it was. I know my hair was a lot shorter back then, so I'm like, that must have been a while. Was that like a year?
Probably a year ago, yeah.
Yeah, and hearing a little bit of what you had planned and had no idea that in the process of all of this, you would end up in prison.
Yeah.
Or jail, I should say. Not prison yet. Let's hope you don't get convicted of any felonies and have to be put away. But yeah, it's been just an absolutely wild ride for you. Why is it, which, again, Ed Young, you got arrested at his church. I know you got in a world of trouble at Kenneth Copeland's compound, and we're going to talk about those things. But why is it that this filmmaker, Nathan Apffel, is causing so much trouble? And why are these mega churches and mega pastors, as I like to call them, so afraid of you?
Probably because I just answer or ask very simple questions, and I look for answers to those simple questions. And this show's about 12 years in the making. We actually filmed it almost a decade ago. I was just young and kind of naive, and I didn't have my ducks in a row, so to speak. And in edit, I didn't really like where it was going. I felt it was kind of ranty, and there was no, we presented a problem, but there was no solution or potential solution. So I feel God knew I wasn't ready, so I backed off of it. And it helped me refine those questions. I became a father, which I feel that sense of love for my daughter kind of steered back to the church. And so instead of being frustrated with the church, I realized I love it. And so I took that more fatherly approach to it. And out of that, I just started asking really simple questions. And you were probably one of my first 6 interviews for the show. And flash forward 18 months, and we've sat down with, former chief counsels to the IRS. We've sat down whistleblowers across the Christian spectrum, from non-denominational churches to, the LDS church. We've sat down with professors at Oxford, Notre Dame, Berkeley. And I feel like we've tapped into something, or God's guided me down this road. And I told my buddy this morning, he's like, Nathan, I've just been watching you. It's crazy. And I go, well, I'm just stupid enough to ask the questions, just keep going forward. So they're really afraid of these really simple questions. And it starts with, what is a church?
And that is a big one. And I want to get into all those questions because that's a really good one. And I know this is called the religion business. And sadly, I think it's become reduced to a business in a lot of cases. But before we do, I just want to jump in because people have seen the headlines. This is fresh, right? Of what happened to you when you were at Ed Young's church. You've given me a clip from that, and we're going to play that. But first, can you kind of set this clip up? Like, what led you to be on campus at Ed Young's church on a Sunday?
Yeah, so we have big fans of what we're doing, and then big haters. Haters say, "Oh, these guys are strictly out to, be menaces, to cause problems." What nobody realizes yet is the only reason why I was there is because he's the example of one of the major loopholes that the show presents in the IRS tax guidelines and regulations, kind of undergird the religious exemptions here in the US. So we were there for one very specific purpose, and that was to find out his housing allowance. So Ed is our example, our man in the flesh of the issues of housing allowance. And then Kenneth Copeland is another example of a loophole in the IRS tax guidelines. So every move we make is very strategic. And so I had reached out to Fellowship Church multiple times. They used to have a message board on their website. I sent multiple messages for about 2 years through that, never heard anything back. And then I finally, there was no cell phone, there was no phone number on the website. And then I went back on maybe 4 months ago, and sure enough, they had removed the message board, but they had put a phone number. So I called the phone number, left a message, never heard back. So I called again, and instead I said, "Hey, I want to give. How can I give?" And within 24 hours, boom, they had returned my call. And I don't lie. I said, "My name's Nathan." I told them exactly who I am. And so then we called Dennis Brewer Jr., who's the general counsel of Fellowship Church, who's now who was ordained, which is wild. And so I gave them all these olive branches, so to speak, to talk. And finally, well, they don't want to talk, so we're showing up. And that's what happened. And I just made 2 simple signs, that said, "Ed, what's your salary and what's your housing allowance today?" It was not a threat.
Well, those are fighting words to some of these guys, because this is like, I remember interviewing the former elders at Harvest Bible Chapel. And that was the question they wanted to know. Here they are, elders. They were given, literally, you'll love this, a pie chart of the salaries and, different categories of the budget, and asked to approve the budget. And they're like, "We can't approve this budget. I mean, these are businessmen. Like, they know better." And it really boiled down to, we want to know what's James McDonald's salary. And literally, they got in a room with him. It escalated to the point where they had this meeting. And apparently, when they asked him that again, he slammed his fist on the table and said to them, shouted with them. And I know, to hear them describe it, it was like there was a demon inside this man. And he said, "I would lose 10,000 sheep before I would tell you the answer to that question." Really, really revealing of what's going on in these churches. So you asked what has become somewhat of a fighting question. It shouldn't be. I mean, if they're a secular nonprofit, we've said this a million times on this program, but if you're a secular nonprofit, you have to file 990. One of the things you disclose are your top 3 wage earners. And if there's a housing allowance, you have to disclose that as well. For some reason, and I kind of get it. These are churches. We don't like the government involved in our religious business. We get that. But at the same time, these are churches now. I don't think anybody envisioned these churches and ministries growing so large that you have tens of millions of dollars at your disposal. And that's what they're dealing with literally no accountability at all. And the housing allowance, for those who aren't familiar with it, this is something that's afforded just to ministers. explain exactly what a housing allowance is and kind of how it's abused.
Yeah, so a housing allowance, I got to sit down with Philip Hackney, who was is one of the leading brains in the U.S. on the nonprofit sector and the religious exemptions in particular. Like the IRS for 5 years overseeing the nonprofit sector. So you're talking about the smartest lawyer in the U.S. that understands the nuance, and he presents it in the show that basically housing allowance are set aside from your salary. And it goes all the way back to when ministers would live on property and at a parsonage, which is the Copeland's story. And the church still owns that parsonage, but they can live in it for free. Well, pastors or ministers wanted to live off site. And so, okay, the IRS said, hey, we can set aside, you can give them an allowance that's taxed, but it's taxed differently than a salary. So you can offset your tax burden quite aggressively with this. And you can go out and you can cover their rent or their mortgage with this allowance. Well, the allowance is defined as reasonable. So it must be within reason. Well, who's going to define reasonable? And it's going to be a CPA or a lawyer. And so what we've seen over the last, it's really started to be abused in the last decade from what we've seen. But, there's pastors taking housing allowances upwards of $1 million a year. And then they can stand on stage and say, hey, my salary's $200,000 or $300,000. But what they're not saying is they're taking this basically like there's this massive reduced tax burden on top of that. And we have documentation from Ed Young that talks about what's covered in this housing allowance, and down payments on homes are covered. The church will cover your down payment. They'll cover your mortgage. They'll cover repairs. They'll cover HOA fees. They'll cover literal kitchen cleaners and cleaners to come and clean the house. And it's all in the bylaws or in the amendment in Ed's amendment. And then, so you nailed it, ministers get housing allowances. And so Ed's story is very interesting because his general counsel, his lawyer, Dennis Brew Jr., was ordained. And now he takes a housing allowance.
We should have gotten ordained, Nathan.
For sure. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, man, the Roy's Report, we could have like a great housing allowance
100%
for me. Yeah. Well, I don't take a housing allowance, just so you know. I'm not ordained.
Good.
So, okay. So wonderful. Thanks for explaining that. I know for a lot of folks, that's probably something they don't realize and maybe might be a little more hip to now. But the problem is they're still hiding these and not making these available. So let me pull up this clip that you've given us of your time at Ed Young's church, and maybe you can tell us what's going on here. Okay.
Yeah. So we just walked on. We were very polite. We didn't interrupt service. A lot of people are saying we interrupted the service. No, I just wanted to walk on and hold these signs. And within 3 minutes, probably less, 2 minutes, I was surrounded by about 20 armed security guards. And this gentleman here said, hey, glad to have you back. And I said, thank you. And then the gentleman with the backwards cap, he said, hey, feel free to stand right here. And so they were kind of baiting us to just stay. My camera operator, Steve, asked them where the property line was, and they said, we don't have to tell you. And then the sheriff actually told us that they owned the roads around the church. Come to find out they didn't. But so what I think happened is they wanted to arrest me. They were they wanted to make a show out of it. And it's almost, I call it like an autonomous machine now. They've created this machine that has a life and breath of its own. And once you get, private security, armed guns that are probably ex-military, they're trigger happy. They want to be the hero. And so just naturally escalate. And I was super polite. I was respectful. The sheriff was who contracted was wrenching down on my arm and really trying to hurt me. And I was like, hey, sir, can you please stop? Here he's telling my camera operator that he can't film, which is not legal. Come to find out, I talked to someone at the Department of Justice. They actually called me. And this sheriff, if he's contracted by Copeland's church, cannot legally be uniformed. And that's probably why he wasn't wearing a body camera. But so here's Steve, the big bearded guy. He's my camera operator. And he said, hey, I'm here. I'm not leaving this property. I don't know the property lines. Arrest me. They would not arrest him. And he's like, hey, I'm ready to sit next to Nathan. Put me in handcuffs right now. and they would not do it. And so they wanted to make an example of me, which I'll tell you right now, they picked the wrong situation, because their lapse in judgment and their hiccups from a security perspective has created a massive legal problem for them. And we're going to run this straight through to show people what's going on.
So at one point, I don't know if people saw it in there, but they actually took your camera.
My phone. So yeah, so the contracted sheriff took my private property and he handed it to a private citizen. You cannot hand off private property. When he started saying I was under arrest, one of the private security guards grabbed my arm and yanked it back. That private security guard cannot touch me. And so there was just these massive lapses in judgment on their part. And it's like I was standing in the parking lot. I'm not a threat. They never searched me until PD got there. So they knew I wasn't a threat. They're like, oh, here's a dude with a sign. We're going to put him in handcuffs. We're going to yank him around. My elbow's extremely damaged. I have a secondary doctor's appointment on the 6th to follow that up. And they just wanted to rough me up. They wanted to make a show of it. And then ironically, the sheriff took my camera operator's camera and threw it on the ground and snapped off a very expensive anamorphic lens that sheared off the camera. And so it was just a total lapse in judgment. PD comes about 40 minutes later. The PD showed up, great PD, and they finally read me my rights. So I hadn't been read my rights for almost 40 minutes. I was detained, sitting there with a contracted sheriff, and about 20 armed security, and no one read me my rights. And so it wasn't until PD came, right when they got on site, they exchanged the cuffs out, and they took me to the car. They read me my rights, and I had a wire on me. I had my glasses on, and I said, hey, these guys took my phone for 40 minutes. I don't know what they did to it. I do not want them to touch this wire or my glasses. And the officer was like, sure, they're going to stay in my custody, my possession. No one's touching these. And so he was very, very aware that I was nervous that these guys were going to either damage my property or just try to make our side of the story disappear.
Okay. The pushback I got when we published on this story was, and interestingly, it was almost all from anonymous accounts that were created this month. But so
of course, yeah.
These X accounts that just pop up for these stories, and then push back. But yeah, one of the things they said, well, this is just a publicity stunt. Nathan knew full well when he came on, this is what was going to happen. How do you respond to those?
Sure. You escalated it. We have footage that isn't shown yet from my first interaction with a couple employees. And I said, hey, I'll gladly leave the property. Just who can I talk to about finances? And they said, we're not answering any of your questions. We're not answering any of your questions. And I said, okay, who owns the property? Because they're like, it's private property. And they said, the church. And okay, who owns the church? And all I'm doing is asking these very simple questions. They know as soon as they answer one of them, it's just this whole can of worms that's going to open. And so they won't do it. And so, yeah, I knew it was going to play out. Like, you look at Ed's temperament. When I saw his Range Rover, it's in the show, it's in the docuseries, literally jump curbs, run over like grass planters, jump under a curb, peel out going 100 miles an hour. And his little golf cart was following him, like basically, evacuating him off the property, because I was there and I wasn't even there at that point.
See, I was wondering why that wasn't in your TikToks. You're just saving that for the show. I cannot wait to see the video of that.
We're saving all the real, what I would call gold, because when you see an arrest, you're like, okay, yeah, Nathan got arrested. You can call me a menace. You could say he knew what was coming, but there's 40 minutes of lead up to that where what Ed Young and Dennis Brewer Jr. don't realize is we've been filming his scene for 2 years. This story is 2 years in the making. And it starts at one of his satellite campuses. And I didn't even know who Ed was. And I was visiting my dad in Dallas, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go to this church. I'm traveling the U.S. looking at churches, and I sat in this church, and something happens there where I walk out and I go, I got to start looking into this church. And boom, you pull the manhole cover off and you just fall straight down the hole.
Well, I think you could just camp out in Dallas right now and have enough for, many docuseries, because I mean, what's happening with the implosion of churches there. At the same time, I was talking to somebody yesterday who is a part of the microchurch movement, and he said, Julie, the microchurches in Dallas are exploding. Like, people are looking for something different. They're looking for something more. And so that, when I hear things like that, I say, yes, God is growing something out of these ashes. But yeah, what is going on, and the way that you were treated, which again, it's finally pulling back the curtain. Like, people are beginning to see this is how people have been treated for a long time behind closed curtains, right? This is how the staff are often treated when they ask questions, when, key donors, when they start asking questions. This is what happens at the churches. This is the way they're treated. Now people are getting to see it, and it's shocking. Although for those of us who have been doing this for a while, I wasn't shocked by any of that. I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Just like you weren't shocked.
Yeah, my mentor called me. My mentor is Ira. I've been working with him since I was 18, so 22 years. And he laughed and he goes, dude, I saw that coming a mile away. And I'm like, I know. I'm like, if you understand the structure of the sector and it's on its death cycle, so to speak, in the US, the institution is, their only card they can play is aggressive in authority in situations like this. And the crazy part is what these guys don't realize is we've probably had 200 to 300 messages since then of people who either worked in the church in the past or have left. Like, one poor kid, he's like 22, and he messaged me personally, and he's like, hey, I want to say thank you. Like, I used to volunteer at that church, and I was working one of their snow pageants, and I was a panda bear, a polar bear with a big old head. And they would grab me by the ear of this costume and yank me around because I was moving too slowly. And he's like, it was just abuse. And he's like, I wanted to help these kids, but I wasn't doing it like the way the production wanted me to do it. And so they just grabbed me by the head of this costume and yanked me around. And he's like, I just left. And I think what we've created are with these big, gateways and Copelands and fellowships, we've created these productions, and it's a saying in the film industry, the show must go on. It's like nothing gets in the way of this production, and that includes people, and people get eaten up and spit out. And I think there's a what do you call it, a tipping point where there's enough people just fed up with it that there's reforms coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of the whole Mars Hill bus, right? With Mark Driscoll. You either get on the bus or you get run over by the bus. And we have forgotten, we always say, the mission, we have these pastors saying the mission basically is more important than the people, forgetting that the mission is the people. That's what churches are about. You and I could get on our soapbox for a long time, but I want to look at some of these other ones. We have something from Kenneth Copeland's church. You gave us pretty wild story here. Again, Kenneth Copeland, one of the biggest televangelists in the country. I have no idea what his total net worth is, because it's probably pretty shielded, but it's got to be huge when you look at the properties he owns and so forth. Tell me what led up to a confrontation at Copeland's compound.
Yeah, Copeland's story is interesting. I wanted to see the parsonage. So to go back to this idea of allowance or parsonage, a parsonage is just a house that the church owns or the ministry owns that the pastor can live in. Well, Copeland's compound is 19,000 square feet. His house is a 19,000 square foot waterfront home. Come to find out, when he bought the property originally, when the church bought the property, because this I think it's 1,200 acres. This 1,200 acre property is owned by the church. When he bought that, they brought machines in and dredged little peninsulas out. So they actually reshaped the waterfront of this lake to put his house right at the end of it. And so this goes, I have documentation. So Copeland has this thing called the Revival Capital of the World. And it's his initial pitch from the 70s. And he saw this plot of land, or, he said God spoke to him that this is the revival capital of the world. Well, I have some of his original marketing material, and he made a lot of promises in this marketing material that he raised money on that he never brought to fruition. And we've talked to the county and the state, and it looks like he never even tried to do it. So in the for-profit world, that'd be called fraud. You're raising money and you're not even trying to do what you're raising money off of. In the religious world, we call it faith, give by faith. And so that's what we wanted to see. I brought this original documentation, we had this 4-foot wide schematic of the 1,200 acre property. And I'd been there twice before. And I said, hey, I want to get to the parsonage because no one's seen this. And so I brought a YouTuber with me who's good at this type of stuff. And we just sketched out. We said, we're going to go to church. And then we just drew the map on these roads. And we're like, here's how we get to the parsonage. And we had no idea what was going to happen. But you have the church in the northern part of the property, the Kenneth Copeland Airport right in the middle, which is ironic that he named the airport after himself. And then at the base of the airport, the runway is his parsonage. So, hey, I don't know gates. We can't see gates, but let's just see what happens. And there was one gate that was left open, which was the initial gate. So we didn't ever touch a gate. We just drove through it. And then we pulled up to a second gate. And I'm like, well, guys, here's where we stop. And then that gate just opened for us. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these gates are on motion sensors. So we went through gate after gate. And then we got to the last gate, probably 200 yards from his house. So we're right there. Come to find out, he has a hunting blind and a high fence. So he has a little high fence hunting property there that's just for himself or his son or whoever. But he has a little hunting area right there. He's got what do you call those? The tall hunting blinds, and about 150 yards away is a corn feeder. So they throw feed out of
Wait, that is not hunting.
No, it's not hunting.
That's target practice.
But
it's not hunting.
I was impressed that he had that, actually. I was like, oh, wow, Cope has this little hunting deal. And so we were stuck at this gate because this final gate had a keypad. And so I called the church hotline, and the only one that would answer is their prayer line. And so I called the prayer line, and I'm like, hey, and they go, oh, Nathan, they knew me by my phone number. So I'm a member partner. I've been paying, so they have all my information. He goes, do you at such and such address? And I had given him a phone number with just a wrong last number. And he goes, it looks like you're calling from a different number. He goes, let me update your number. And I said, his name was Abraham. I go, Abraham, I'm calling the prayer line. Like, why are you asking me these questions? And it's Nathan, it's just standard practice. And he goes, what can I pray for you about? And I'm like, well, I need Copeland's gate code to his house. And I'm like, I've been praying Copeland and I just want the gate code. And he's like, what are you talking about, sir? I'm like, I'm standing at his gate. I can see the house. I want to go say hi. At the parsonage that's owned by the church. And I'm like, so can you just give me the gate code? And he goes, where are you? And I'm like, I'm standing right in front of Copeland's house. And he goes, please hold. And then he hangs up. And so we stood there for probably 30 minutes and no one came. And I'm like, where's his security? Like, we are standing right in front of his house. And so I don't think they thought they probably fired Abraham right there. They're like, you get out of here. But so I was like, okay, they don't know we're here. Let's drive back to the tarmac and just sit on his private runway, and security's going to see us. So we drove back up. We parked our cars. I laid all the documentation on the hood of my car. I had my Starbucks, and we waited. And within a couple minutes, we saw a security car drive by and stop. And we were like, okay, here it goes. And then it escalated very quickly. So the content you have is from this point on.
Okay, let me play it.
Paying members of the church.
If you don't leave, you're going to be criminally trespassed.
So these two gentlemen were great. They were local security. This guy was wild. He almost runs over my camera operator. He jumps out. He impersonates an officer right here. We ask him to see the badge. He won't tell us. And then he goes, you want to see this? And he whips his gun out. And so this guy, this other security guard is very professional. He's military, and he pushes him away and he goes, yo, you got to leave. And he keeps standing here and he keeps showing us his gun walking up. And so come to find out, this gentleman has worked for multiple churches around the U.S. and has been fired or let go multiple times. He is actually one of Copeland's right-hand men. We didn't know who this was. But so right here, he says, your camera is more dangerous than my gun. And I said, how is this even possible? And by the end of it, he knew it overstepped every rule. PD shows up. And this is the interesting differentiation between Copeland and Ed Young. Copeland's church, or Copeland's private security, these two gentlemen, for their knowledge and wisdom, knew the bad optics it would make to arrest us. And so we did not, like, we were respectful. They asked us to leave and we left. Eventually I said, hey, who can I talk to about financials? And they said, you got to leave. They never gave us a contact, but they're like, you have to leave. They knew the optics of arresting just a filmmaker trying to ask questions and what the repercussions of that. And so they were pretty smart in that regard. Ed Young, though, and his guys were just the polar opposite.
It was so interesting, that one guy, when he said the camera is more dangerous than a gun. What a line right there. Camera's more dangerous. And you're like, well, I'm just telling the truth. And the truth, it is more dangerous. I mean, in the end, because that is exactly what you're doing, and you're exposing things. I'm guessing you then at that point, you never made it in to see Kenneth Copeland's parsonage.
No, we never made it in.
Are you going to drone it?
We've droned it already. Yeah, we've been there.
Yeah, okay.
We've been there twice. We have. That's the thing. People are like, oh, these guys are menaces. It's like, no, we're very strategic. And some of these stories are 2 years in the making. Copeland's is a big, big story as well. And so these are just, again, 2 stories that culminate in 2 loopholes that we're presenting. There's 6 total loopholes we present in the show, and these are 2 of them. But Copeland's, let me preface this. Copeland's storyline is not about the parsonage. That was just a dangle. That was a carrot. Copeland's story is this idea that you can present a marketing pitch on paper and there's follow-up or demand that you live up to what you're saying you're going to build, because there's no paper trails. And so that's the big one. Like I said, in the for-profit world, it would be called fraud. In the religious world, we call it faith, living by faith. And so that's the disconnect that we show there is I can go and start raising money for a church build tomorrow, and there's no repercussions if I never build the building.
Well, and there's little, very, very small print at the bottom that says something like, that funds still may end up in a general fund or something like that. I've noticed that because I remember when we were investigating Harvest Bible Chapel, we found out Walk in the Word money. So here's the broadcast ministry. Walk in the Word is using its funds to purchase, essentially, they had this camp in Michigan called Camp Harvest. And well, James wanted to build a trophy herd of trophy deer up there. So these humongous deer, like that aren't naturally found in Michigan. He's buying these things, for tens of thousands of dollars. And then who knows how much it costs to do the whole thing. And Walk in the Word is cutting checks. In fact, I have the checks. Is cutting checks for this thing. And I'm like, how is this legal? People are donating money. You're saying 100% of the money goes to further the ministry, and it's going for a trophy herd up in Michigan. I mean, how can this possibly be? But they're getting away with it.
Yeah, we have one pastor that literally brought a box of dirt on stage with a shovel, and like, hey, we need to raise $7 million because we're breaking ground for our new building. They raised $7 million, never built the building. And so it's like, it is so wild that you can do that and get away with it. And people, donate to you. And yeah.
And the IRS is doing nothing because I've reported so many things to the Attorney General, to the IRS. I thought when I got into this, they just want to know this stuff, and also to the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, who come in and then say, oh no, they're a member in good standing. This is all good. Nobody is policing this, are they?
I'm not a big fan of the IRS. I like my money that I work hard to make, but the IRS doesn't make the laws. Congress does. The IRS is just the enforcement, which puts them in a really tough spot, right? But here's the kicker that we present in the show that Philip Hackney presents. There are not enough people at the IRS level to even begin to look into what you're sending them. He goes, Nathan, the analogy is like a Ferrari on a racetrack. That's the religious exemptions. And behind it is a golf cart. And you say, ready, set, go. And the golf cart is the IRS and the Ferrari is the religious exemptions. There's no way we can even begin to look at complaints. And he's like, the system's just ran away on itself. And it's on the verge of buckling because there's just so much fraud and abuse happening.
And there is a thing. I mean, speaking of the laws, donor intent is a thing. Like you have to honor donor intent. I mean, you're supposed to.
So you're supposed to, but I asked Philip Hackney about this too, and he goes, Nathan, There's no real legal recourse for that. It's one thing if you set up a trust, that money in the trust, and then there's bylaws that protect those funds. But if I'm just on a website, like I was on Fellowship Church's website, and I've given multiple times, I gave that morning, which is so funny. I was in my car and I gave to Fellowship Church because I'm a giver, and I picked the mission fund. But they have no legal obligation to use those resources for missions. There's no recourse for me if I said, hey, why didn't my money go into that? Or it would say, there's no trust. You never signed any documentation that said our goal was to put it there, but it didn't make it there. Sorry. So sadly, there's just no, this is the problem with the religious sector, is there's no legal recourse really for solutions at the federal level or the state level. And so Philip Hackney is basically like, dude, get your house in order. Like, you guys have to do it yourself. Just the situation we're in right now.
Right. And that is why the ECFA was founded, was to get our house in order. And decades later, after its founding, nothing has happened at all. I know that you have some potential solutions that you're looking at, and let's talk about those. But first, I want to go to, just the title of your whole docuseries is The Religion Business, which, I'm like, church is not a business. Church is supposed to be a family. It's the body of Christ. When did it become a business? And, is there anything we can do about it? So how do you answer those questions?
A church is a business, and we have to be able to digest that and say, okay, we file corporate documents with the state. So we have, it's a corporation. It's a nonprofit corporation. That means it's a literal business. There's money coming in. And even Philip Hackney, the former chief counsel of the IRS, I'm like, there's money coming in and money going out. And I'm like, would you call a church a business? He's like, man, no. But I'm like, what do you call a business? He goes, when there's revenues coming in and revenues going out. So I'm like, church is a business. And so I've said the institution has to run itself like a business. And when I can call Mountain Life Church here a business, I can say, okay, sure, it's where the church meets, but this is a business and we pay into this business. It needs to be run with accountability. It needs to be run lean, because businesses that are fat and bloated die. So let's run this puppy lean and make the most with the dollars we have. Then all of a sudden you start looking at it like a business and you say, wow, okay, let's run it like a business. Accountability, transparency, honesty, the tax thing, paying taxes is a total separate discussion. But my goal is to really start calling a spade and saying, this is a business. Let's run it like one.
Certainly the institutional church has a business aspect. I am seeing churches begin, like I mentioned, the micro church. I think there is a movement to say we got to get away from this. And I do wonder sometimes, are we trying to, tame a dragon or something? Like, it's like, yeah, it's a business, and we have these people with no character, and we are trying to tame it. And I just don't know sometimes if it can be tamed, but certainly the ones that want to be honest, I think, can be honest. And I think too, I think of the whole, there used to be a corporation, or it was a clothing store here in Chicago called Sims. And their whole tagline was that an educated consumer is our best customer. And so I feel like what we're doing, at the very least, we're educating the consumer, the donor, the person in the pews, or the large philanthropist who's giving, I've talked to people who've given, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And I have one person on the story I'm working on right now, and you may know what I'm referring to, who's like, I bought that church once and now I'm having to buy it again because the first one squandered it, didn't want to do church, and now he's selling it to somebody who wants to do a real church. And she's like, why should I have to buy this building again? But again, I think we need to empower donors to begin, because at the bottom line, these things do run on money, and you pull the funds, they're not going to be able to do anything. So, so talk about this. I love that you've got this app that you're working on. Talk about the app and why you think this could be, a really powerful tool to be part of the solution.
Yeah. So the show presents the problem, but it also is a very uplifting show, because it shows that the nonprofit sector as a whole, and then if you drill down into just Christianity, and I say, people are like, why are you attacking Christianity? And I'm saying, I'm not attacking it, but it's my faith that I was raised in, and I expect the most of my faith. And so that's why we're looking at Christianity. Christianity has enough resources to radically transform the world right now. If we could just stop the internal theft that's taking place, the Christian church could fund the top 30 global social issues and fix those just by the theft, if we just stop the theft. And then you say, hey, man, if we just, and then reallocated or we were a little shrewder on our money, you could solve the top 50. And so it's really an exciting story to say, hey, we have the resources. Like, we don't need more money. We don't need more, bigger stages. We need to be better stewards of those resources. And so that's what the show presents. And then the technology, it's called Broken Shepherds, because we're all flawed and broken, and even human shepherds need accountability. And so I always pitch it like a dating app. And so you're dating. The church is dating its congregants, and a secular nonprofit, it's dating its donors. And you always want to put your best foot forward. And so the app it's a race to accountability and transparency. And we're working with a couple of development economists here in the US, and they're like, Nathan, you guys have created the perfect trap. It's game theory. You got to play. And I'm not going to give too much away in regards to technology. We go into beta December 1st. So we have 200 churches and nonprofits that we're onboarding. It's a donation platform, but we have scraped the federal and state databases, and you have to play this game whether you want to or not. And so no one's going to be ready for this. So the easiest pitch is it's a dating app. The more transparent you are and accountable, the more congregants you get put in front of, and the more donors you get put in front of. And through our research, there's just a lot of sad, we'll call them like mandatory glitches in the nonprofit system. And one, for example, is the average nonprofit spends about 30% of its budget just on fundraising. And then when I talk to small nonprofits, their leadership, the majority of their time is spent on fundraising. And so I'm like, man, how can we eradicate, number one, this cost center, number two, this energy center? And so let's say you, Julie, you run a nonprofit that works with foster children. If I'm a donor in this app and I've my selections, my interest selections are foster care, you have the potential to pull me as a donor, even though I'm on the other side of the country. And so the more accountable you are, and the more financial information you feed the app, we have an AI algorithm that spits you out a rating in the background. We call it the light rating. And you will rank higher than other foster care nonprofits, the more transparent you are. And then what it gives me, the donor, is it says, hey, Nathan, Julie's nonprofit is a 8 out of 10. That's tracking in the top 10% of foster care nonprofits. Oh, and 45% of every dollar goes directly to impact. That's pretty good. And so the goal is to actually democratize the donor process. And instead of having you have to chase 2 or 3 major big donors, where if one falls out or stops giving, your nonprofit is at risk of failure. Now we're going to put 100,000 donors in front of you that all might give $5. So it stabilizes the revenue source. It stabilizes that volatility of donation, and then it also repurposes that 30% or the majority of that 30% of fundraising, and then the time needed for fundraising. It's the big churches and national nonprofits are not going to like this, and then the smaller local churches and the smaller nonprofits, who are doing the majority of the heavy lifting in their area. We call it, in the show, we call it local social capital. You're building the social capital of your locale, which is what the point of a church is all about. Focus locally and help your local community. Those are the smaller churches and the smaller nonprofits. And usually those smaller churches and smaller nonprofits are going to be more accountable and transparent just to begin with, because they have resources to screw around with.
I love that. We actually did our very first financial review. We had never done that before. So we got auditors to do this. Again, we've been around. I mean, we just started 5 years ago, and we finally got a budget that was over $300,000, which is kind of where we're like, okay, we need to get, you can go on our website right now, and we've got financial statements where we've just self-reported. And you want to see how much I make? Go on there and look. Like we just say, we're completely transparent on that stuff. But we're like, we need to get a third party and get them in. And so we just found out, do you know how much we spend on fundraising? We'll be publishing it soon, but I think it's like maybe 6%.
See, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And administration fundraising together is about 20%. We spend 80% on program.
See, that's unheard of. Yeah, that's unheard of.
And part of that is that I have just always believed, like, well, one, if I was faithful to God, to what he called us to do, that he would bring in the resources. And I've never, like the first few years, I didn't put any energy into fundraising. It just came. We just like put up and said, hey, this is our goal for this month. What do you give? And people just got behind it. They just gave, it was amazing. So we didn't have to put much into it because people were doing it. And then I've realized, well, we probably need to get a little more intentional about this, but I've always been, it's like, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And so we have put all our energy into, we're going to show what's happening in the church and report the truth, good, bad, and the ugly, what's happening, and trust God will bring it in. And he has. But it was pretty exciting. I have to say, when we saw what our numbers actually were, the percentages going to each thing, I was like, dang, we're doing a good job. And by God's grace, we'll continue to do a good job. And I'm excited to be on your app. But it's funny, sometimes we do have trouble raising funds from, in fact, the one that we're just starting to get is your really big donor. Most of our donors, they're giving their $50 gift. We're like, praise the Lord, thank you. We have a few at maybe 1,000, 5,000, few, very small at like 10,000, but we're just starting to see where we're seeing major philanthropists go, man, we love what you're doing, and we want to be a part of it. And so that's kind of exciting. But early on, I did ask a philanthropist, and I was going to ask you what your favorite interview was for the religion business. But, seeing as I'm one of them,
Well, I've interviewed, well, let me, I'm going to give Americans and American Christians are the most generous people in the world.
By far.
And I want to give encouragement out there. Like, this show is not about damaging faith or damaging the generosity. We actually want to encourage both faith and discovery of your faith and generosity. But it has to be shrewd generosity. Your dollar can make major impact. And I was in Uganda a few months ago for the show, and I got to sit down with Sister Rosemary, and Sister Rosemary she's like the Mother Teresa. They call her the Mother Teresa of Africa. When Coney was doing his wars in northern Uganda, she in 500 orphan children a night into her liberty, and she's just this probably 4'10", the sweetest woman ever. And she was probably the most interesting interview ever. She'd taken a vow of chastity. She had taken a vow of poverty, which she goes, Nathan, I don't call it a vow of poverty. I call it a vow of charity, because it comes in. I immediately get to use it on the people in need. But she was just so brilliant because, ironically, she works at a Catholic convent, or whatever you want to call it, property. They don't even. I said, hey, can I see your sanctuary? She goes, no, you don't want to see it. It's just full of boxes. She goes, we don't even use the sanctuary. She has schools and dorms and a hospital, and she goes, we pray and worship everywhere. But she does not get $1 from the Roman Catholic Church, not $1. She has to go and fundraise, and she doesn't call donors. She calls them partners, because she goes, you're partnering with us. And I asked her, I was like, okay, so where do you find God, Rosemary? And she goes, it's when I step out into the unknown. And she goes, as soon as I step out in faith, and I'm going to get watery eyed. She's like, as soon as I step out in faith into that unknown, that's where I find God. And she's like, God will always catch me. We have never needed. And they live very simple lives over there, but they have 300 kids or 300 women and a lot of single mothers in their programs every year. They grow food for 2,000 kids in South Sudan. Like, it is, and this is the best part. She goes, Nathan, I see this as a business. And she goes, I don't want to rely on donors or partners. I want to make this all self-sustainable. And I'm like, that's it, actually. Like, the girls, when they're coming to school, they're learning tailoring. And so what are they doing? They're literally making all the uniforms for all the local restaurants in Gulu. And then the restaurants buy the uniforms. And she's like, I don't want to have to wait for some American donor to give me money. She's like, I want to make this self-sustainable. And it's so awesome to see. And And then to talk about the generosity of Americans, like I said, there's 300 women in her programs every year. She has a school now to put their kids, these single mothers' children through school, K through 6th, as they're learning. She has a hospital. Everybody lives on site. And I'm like, okay, this is a big property. It's probably 50 acres maybe. I'm like, what's your annual operating budget? And she's like, $80,000. And I was like, wait, what? For 3 meals a day for these girls, the schools, everything. And I'm like, wait, what? I had to just stop, because I know pastors that pay themselves that in the housing allowance a month, And so it was just, it was so inspiring to see a woman like that who's radically transforming her city, all by living out what she believes are the tenets of her faith. And so that was a really cool interview. And then it inspired me to come back. And that's one thing we show in the docuseries is we show all these different, we'll call them varieties of church, from denominational to theological differences to literally how some stateside pastors are reutilizing empty buildings on their property. It's amazing. There's a lot of really good work being done out there.
So cool. I can't wait to see this docuseries. It's gonna be amazing. I think it's gonna blow people's minds. I think it's just, I'm excited. I was excited a year ago or so when we talked initially, but I'm really excited now. One of the things is, like I was saying about the donors, but it actually relates to a clip that I have that you've now lost your ability to put up clicks like this, because this was initially a TikTok and you got busted off of TikTok, right?
Yeah, we got permanently banned. We didn't even get a warning. They just permanently banned us as child endangerment, which is basically sex trafficking. And so we got flagged and removed as child endangerment, all because we're posting videos about religion and math and facts on religion.
And it was a politician you found out that reported you. You don't know who, but
we got word that a politician or a very wealthy individual made that call and said, remove this account. And so we were big shout out to Instagram and Zuckerberg, because we were thinking, okay, Instagram's next, and Instagram has let us stay up, and which is awesome. So, but there's a lot of people that don't want us.
Absolutely. Well, this is a clip that, again, was on TikTok and shows kind of your work, but just a little clip from the interview we did together. So let me just play it. I was talking to somebody once who's a person of a lot of means, and I was saying, hey, you've seen our work at the Roy's Report, and we're such a by the bootstraps kind of organization. We're very lean. And I said, hey, would you consider giving to what we're doing? And he looked at me and said, Julie, people like to build buildings. They like to build houses. Like, that's fun. And so that's where I like to put my money, because I like to build houses. He's like, you're like the housing inspector, and nobody really wants to pay for the housing inspector. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. And that's why all of our houses are falling down.
Yeah, powerful statement there, Julie.
It's true. When you're trying to raise money for a watchdog kind of organization like ours, it is more fun in some ways to say, hey, we did, and wow, what an amazing ministry you just talked about right there. I would like to give to that ministry. That is outstanding. I mean, it's doing just some really great work. And the thing I often say too is like, hey, listen, we're not asking for $10 out of every $10 you have. Give us one or two. Like, just give us a little bit. Think of us as your insurance. This is your insurance to make sure when you donate that there's going to be somebody holding those organizations accountable. Same thing with the work you're doing. I mean, what's your budget for what you're doing?
What I do is I used to be a cleanup guy in the film world. So an agency would come in, spend $1 million of a client's money. The client wouldn't like the commercial or wouldn't like what they did. And then the producer would call me freaking out. They'd go, Nathan, we've got $20,000. Can you fix this? And I'm like, well, someone got to spend $1 million. Okay, let me see what I can do. And I'd go in and tinker with 20 grand, and we'd polish it and make something nice, And so I can my whole career has been milking a dollar. And so what we've produced, I mean, like from the technology to the show, no one will ever know the budget because it should have 2 extra zeros on the end of it. And but that's where God works, I think, is he brought the right crews, the right developers. Everybody that's on this believes in it, and it's really inspiring. But yeah, we pinch pennies in a big way.
I mean, I look at some of the budgets of some of the Christian media and I'm like, oh, dang, what we would do with that budget. But again, so happy that you're doing what you're doing. And this is just an incredible project coming out. The plan is now around Easter.
The plan is Easter. We're going to launch our trailer on Christmas Day, the full blown trailer of the show. Again, I put out a video on Instagram a few weeks ago because people were like, man, you keep moving the date. And I've produced TV for my whole career, 20 years. This isn't TV. Our goal is reform of the IRS tax guidelines. And so we have to walk very carefully and make sure we dot all our I's and cross all our T's. So yes, as of now, Easter is our goal and our target. And like I said, the app will be done January 1st. And so we're going into beta. Well, it'll be ready for beta December, but we're going to be ready to launch it in January. The show's pretty much going to be done by then, but there's a couple stories that we have to let close. And one of them is this Ed Young story, because what they don't realize is they're opening a can of worms that there's some documentation that I really want to get my hands on. And if they can push, I'm going to be able to request that documentation. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up a wormhole that no one is ready for.
Are we talking subpoena power here?
Yes. And then what I've realized is God's using me, I think, to stitch together such a big idea with these expert voices that I've brought together. I can see the forest through the trees, so to speak. And I don't even think the church leadership, I don't think their lawyers can even see it. And there is one document that I'm wanting, and it is so deep and buried in that. It's like it's their coveted ring, and they don't even realize that I'm going to be asking for that. And as soon as I get that, the 400,000 registered churches in the US are going to go, oh my God. That's it. That's the bedrock. That's the foundation where all our congregants are going to start going to. And they do that, the whole institution unravels. And so that's why I'm saying Easter, but if I can get that document, we will.
I know what you're talking about because I was sued once. And my husband and I joked, we're like, man, that was like Christmas come early, because then we had subpoena power and we could do all, and we were getting stuff from people because we knew where the bodies were buried. I'd call them and be like, hey, you're going to get the subpoena by email, send it to me. And we were publishing before, right about the time we had to notify the other side that we'd even gotten it. So it's unbelievably dumb what some of these people do, what some of these mega churches do, or these celebrity pastors that are, that their tactics reveal their heart, right? But they do things because they're so used to being in control, and they don't realize what they're even opening themselves up to.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's in one of our videos, I called Ed a cog. I'm like, he's just a cog in this machine. I don't even have anything against him personally or against Joel Osteen or Kenneth Copeland. Like, they're all just cogs, and they're byproducts of this institutional machine that's 111 years in the making. It really dates back to income tax in 1913. And they're just the conclusion to it. And so every system is cyclical. And so, you had mentioned it earlier, what rises from the ashes. And it's like, when you look at Christ's story, his birth and death and resurrection, it's like, that's a model that I think institutional churches should take on and adapt. You look at Gateway right now and what's happening at Gateway, the leadership is still trying to protect the institution. And it's like, dude, let it die. It had its moment. Let the institution die. And what happens? All those thousands of faithful Christians will go out into their community, and new growth will arise, and home churches will pop up, and maybe a couple big churches. But it's like, you got to let the system die when it's ready to die. But it's like, no, that $40 million a year budget, we got to control it. We got to keep it. It's all man's greed. And it's time to let a lot of institutions die.
Yeah. And I think we are going to see something new come from all of this. And I'm praying that I get to see it. And I'm praying, you say at the beginning, you said you have a child now and that it changes your perspective. I have grandkids now. And man, when I think of, Lord, please let there be a healthy church, a church that's God-honoring church to disciple my grandkids and for them to, their kids and grandkids. Like that's what I want to see, unless the Lord comes back and then,
Yeah.
then we don't have any of these problems. And I'm happy for that to happen too. But again, Nathan, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. God bless you in this. And I'm eager. I'm really eager. I think God's in it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Julie, for your time. I love what you guys are doing. And yeah, hopefully we can get some more eyeballs and donors your way through Broken Shepherds.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yep. Have a good day.
Bye. You too. And thanks for listening to The Roys Report, a podcast dedicated to reporting the truth and restoring the church. I'm Julie Roys. And if you've appreciated this podcast and our Christian journalism, would you please consider donating to The Roys Report to support our ongoing work? As I've often said, we don't have advertisers or many large donors. We simply have you, those who care about truth and transparency within the church. To donate, just go to julieroys.com/donate. That's julieroys.com/donate. Also, just a quick reminder to subscribe to The Roys Report on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. That way, you won't miss any of these episodes. And while you're at it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word about the podcast by leaving a review. And then, please share the podcast on social media so more people can hear about this great content. Again, thanks so much for joining me today. Hope you were blessed and encouraged.